All right, everybody, we're going to get started. So yesterday when we left off, we were talking about kind of stepping out of the mainstream and ideas. Like the more interested you are in getting a job quickly, the smarter idea it is to like find a smaller niche or like a place that other folks are not looking. You'd be surprised, perhaps, how narrow a lot of people's field of view is. While I always joke about like Dallas, I've been to Dallas. It's not that bad a place. Whenever there are like jobs in Dallas, people are always like, "Ooh, Dallas, I can't." And I'm like, "Can't? Let's say won't," because you definitely could. But even places like Broomfield, sometimes people are like, "Ooh, 20 minutes, too far." And I'm like, that's an interesting choice. I think downtown Denver is a great place. If you are expecting or / kind of constricting yourself to a Denver Boulder job hunt, I think that's an okay thing to do if you have the understanding and the budget to know that that's going to take longer. Like it's more likely going to press towards that like 90, 100, 110 day kind of thing. There are always new options. It's not really, we all have like biases in these conversations, right? It's frequently said that it's like, oh, there's like so many students or so many alums or whatever that the market's like saturated. That's not really what I see when I look around. It's more that the ecosystem isn't growing quite as fast as people would like to say it is. And yes, there are like a bunch of jobs on built in Colorado or whatever, but many of those are, as I was describing yesterday, kind of the like fishing things of like, we'll just put a job up all the time, and like, sure, if we had like amazing people with 8 years experience, we'd hire like 10, but we're not actually going to hire anybody unless some of those people pop up. There are some good trends there locally where we're seeing more and more commonly this thing where a company whose headquarters is somewhere else is opening an office here. And whether like, okay, technically yes, Amazon has like people here and stuff, it's like dozen or two people, it's not like hundreds of people, but like a couple students are working at a company called Vertifor that's like based in Michigan, and then they're now opening an office here. Our friends at Gusto down the street, where Front End used to be hosted when it was first starting up, they're in SF and they're trying to build a Denver team, and I think that pattern's going to continue, and so that's nice for you, good for you, because there are more mid-sized company options where if you want to stay local, a year or two ago, it was either tiny startup or Lockheed, and there like wasn't a whole lot in the middle. Something that is important to understand, like as you're trying to do this outreach and talk to people and interview and so forth, is to try and dig into, think about, research, ask questions about them and what their role is like and kind of what their priorities are. A benefit for you is that in the space of web applications, there are a lot of people who are like me, which is that we started building web sites in like the 90s, and then in the 2000s started building web applications and thought it was really fun and cool. And spoiler alert, like I think building software is like okay. In case I haven't mentioned that to you before, I don't think it's like, oh my God, the greatest thing ever. And when you first start out, like it's pretty awesome. Like right now, you're hopefully pretty excited about it. And after 5 or 10 years, you're like, I kind of like been there and done that. And I've had some projects that went well and cool. And I had other projects where I dumped 18 months of my life into a thing that went in the dumpster. And there's questionable research, but what's like said in the industry is two things around 5 years, that it's something like only 10% of software lasts longer than 5 years. and the size of the industry doubles every 5 years. So relatively speaking, there are always very few people. There are like less than half people in the industry have 5 years experience and have actually like shipped software that anyone uses. And as a now aged developer, the software side often for folks starts to get a little bit boring, and the people side gets more interesting. And so what you'll find is that there are a lot of or a growing number of developers who have been kind of in the game in these companies for 10, 12, 14 years and are now more interested in like mentoring and leadership and team lead stuff than they are in writing software. And those kinds of people are your best advocates because they're the ones who are very expensive to the company. They're very like high value employees. When they do write software, it's like good and it works the first time, unlike you. And they very much are the ones who are going to be like, hire this noob, I'll take them under my wing, it'll be my problem. And that's a great scenario for you, not only because you hopefully get some degree of mentorship and so forth, but also because the company won't say no to that person because they're terrified of that person leaving. Like that's the person who has 10 recruiters a day being like, come have this job, come have this job. And they're like, no, 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 no. And then when the company's like, oh, you can't do this thing you want, then they're like, see ya. Like, I'll go to one of these other places that'll do it. So if you get the opportunity to like cross paths with any of those people, look out for it and do it. Particularly, there are some interesting influences of location, and there's kind of a running like joke or meme around San Francisco and relocating to San Francisco and developers who are anywhere but San Francisco, and when they get offered jobs that are in SF, and it's like, I didn't know there were jobs in SF. Like I could move to SF. Like obviously I could move to SF. Like if I wanted to be in any experienced developer, if they wanted to live in San Francisco, they'd be there already. What you'll find is if you're looking anywhere other than San Francisco, you'll find people who are trying to build local community. And those are folks who are very likely to be knowledgeable about things that are going on, who's moving where, what companies are on the ups and downs. And they're really just like great sources of information for you. And so anywhere you want to go, like even if you wanted to stay here, like in Golden, there's a Ruby user group, and it's like 18 people, you know. And if you go there and you're like, I think Golden's awesome, I like hiking, and it's not that far away, and where would y'all want to work around here? And then people be like, oh, you should check out this person. Oh, talk to this. Whereas when you're in a larger ecosystem, it's harder to get those leads and recommendations. We talked yesterday about looking at sponsors and speakers and so forth. The best, if you're going to attend a meetup, which as I said, like I'm not the biggest fan of, the only ones that are going to be valuable to you are in this kind of Goldilocks zone, which is like 10 to 40 attendees. When it gets to be over 40, it's people just talk to the people they know and then like go sit in their seat and then go back to talking to people they know and then they leave. Under 10, there's often like, there's just not a lot going on there. And so if you want to consider meetups, that's what I would look at. Try and track people down on Twitter, on maybe GitHub, maybe email. Has anybody ever showed you my like GitHub technique? I don't know if I could take ownership of it, but two things I should mention. One, I started using this service that has a free account called Mattermark, and it's pretty neat. It's like a sales tool or tool built for salespeople, but it allows you to like look up a company or look up an individual and then kind of mine some data about them, like around their funding. And the part I like best is it has some significant data set of email addresses. And so you like find a person and you click like find email, and it's like spinner, 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 spinner. Here's their email address. Cool, awesome. I think it's a 30-day trial, but just make it count. Second technique is anybody related to programming at all as a developer, sometimes even PMs and so forth. If you can find them on GitHub, what I do this like a couple times a week. Find somebody on GitHub, and then I'll find a repo that's theirs, not a fork, not a contribution to something else, like something that they own. Clone it, and then run git log, and it'll be like, oh, here's their name and here's their email address, and then just email them. And the one thing not to do there is start off the email with a really awkward thing of like, hey, sorry for emailing you out of the blue. Like, just get into it. Like that, you can make it awkward by being awkward. Just get into being like, hey, I saw you work at this company, blah, blah, blah. Was hoping I could maybe ask you some questions about what you're seeing in this ecosystem, whatever. One of the mistakes that folks make, like in that kind of early, I think of it as handshaking, where you're like trying to make some contact and have conversation. There was a guy I did some work for once who was a just tremendous dick, is the real truth of it. But he said one thing that stuck with me, which was you got to sell when they're in the buying mood. And we would have clients reach out about, I was doing training classes at the time, and sometimes it was like, yeah, I'm busy today, but like I'll get back to them with this estimate like tomorrow or the next day. And he's like, no, it needs to be now. Like you need to put down the work that you have to send the estimate for the work that you want, because they're already thinking about buying. And that made a lot of sense, and I've actually tried to follow that since then. For you, what that looks like is when you actually do get some communication from somebody, when somebody responds to an email or they indicate an interest in like getting together or showing you around their office or whatever it is, you want to make all those things happen as soon as possible and like just really press the issue. So I would say, especially if you are graduated or once you graduate, that there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get back to somebody in the same day. Even while you're in Mod 4, I think you could at least set that goal for yourself and to say like, by the end of each night, I will have responded to like anybody who reached back to me that day. In terms of setting up any kind of conversation or meeting or coffee or whatever, or visit, what I like to do is I try and make it super easy for the person. So I figure out like where's their office, and I'll say like, hey, could I come like meet you? I saw there's this Ink Coffee across the street. Would any of these times work for you? And I'm gonna pitch them one time that's in a AM, one time that's in a work PM, and one time that's after work PM. Does that make sense? And they're gonna be in like the next couple days, like 2-3 days out, not like 2-3 weeks out. If you're going somewhere else, like you want to go get a job in Seattle, what you'll find when you talk to people is that they're hesitant to, they don't want to feel like they're promising you something. And so when you say like, oh yeah, I want to come to Seattle, da da da, could I get coffee with you? They'll be like, yeah, let me know when you're in town. Let me know when you're in town. Because if we set some date, then it kind of implies like some weight of responsibility on them. And this is a place I'm an advocate for like selective truth manipulation. And so I would tell, like, if it was Seattle and it's Wednesday today and somebody's like, oh yeah, cool, let me know when you're in town, I would tell them, actually, I'm gonna be there Thursday and Friday next week. I have Thursday morning and Friday afternoon open. Could you meet at either of those times? And then they're like, oh yeah, 10 a.m. Thursday. And that's like, cool, southwest.com. Let me get these tickets to Seattle and like pack as many of those things as you can together. But don't wait. Like you gotta make it happen, even if it means kind of bending the truth a little bit. It was just really technically a timing issue, because it was true that I was gonna be there next week. That was just coming after we confirmed the meeting. And the piece that we haven't talked a lot about that I want to start to like get into today is this idea of discipline. And I've been talking about it in these sessions like a while, and with staff and stuff more lately, around these ideas of like discipline, hustle, and skill. And like skill, right? We said yesterday it's kind of like it's more or less set at the point that you graduate. You can erode it and let it rust. That's very dumb. Don't do that. You're not going to grow it that much. The hustle part, I think we've talked a lot of, like, that's what we're saying about sending emails, reaching out to people, and trying to give talks and meetups and write blog posts, and like all those kinds of things are the hustle. And the third piece with discipline is, to me, the make or break part, because the other two you can do in like fits and spurts, and they can be effective, but you can't accidentally discipline, and you can't like once in a while discipline. I would, with my strongest recommendation, push you to have a calendar, which to some of you is like, obviously I'm a grown-up, I have a calendar. You'd be surprised, many of your friends do not have calendars, and they're free and you can get one. You should lay out a calendar because, not because like you don't know what to do, but because you want to make a plan that's achievable. One of the challenges when we talk about job hunt, and people get real uncomfortable when we start talking about like mental health and the job hunt. Hunting for a job is like fun for 5 minutes, and then after that it's like stressful and possibly depressing until like hopefully one beam of sunshine rains down upon you and like everything's amazing, right? And if you set out with the plan of like, my goal is to get a job, cool, and now you're gonna have failure at that goal for like 45 days, 50 days, 60 days before finally achieving something. Hopefully, that's like the best case scenario for you. And during all that time where you're not achieving the goal, all you have is like uncertainty of like, am I doing the right things? Did I accomplish anything today? I don't know. That's not a good place to be. And what you want to do are try and figure out what are the small goals that are going to lead up to this big goal. Like, what are the small goals that make the big goal inevitable? My base recommendation for people is to lay out a 6-hour day. You might notice that's how Turing works. And I would look at it as 4 90-minute segments in a day. I would do 90 minutes of technical practice. I do 90 minutes of like research, which is digging into like new places I haven't looked at before, job listings, that kind of thing. I do 90 minutes of outreach to like brand new things, people I have not reached out to before, and so forth. And then I do 90 minutes of cleanup, where that cleanup is like getting back to people I already have conversations with, making sure, sending confirmations, thank yous, and all those kinds of things. If you lay out a calendar like that, you can succeed at things every day. And you can get to the end of the day and say like, okay, maybe I didn't get a job today, but like, did I do that technical practice I set out to do? Check. Did I do the outreach thing? Fucking hated that part. Check, right? Did I do the other thing? Check. And like, just giving a bit of organization, it builds momentum. And that's the most critical thing to you, not actually getting the work done. Like having the feeling of like, yes, I am a person who gets work done. Yes, like I can actually look back and say like, here's the things I did today. Here's the things I did this week. Maybe I'm still a good person, and like someone will hire me. And if you do those things, it will work out. The part that no one's willing to do, I'll tell you, like, I feel like a lot of my best recommendations, I just throw them out and then people are like, oh, that's interesting, trash can. And is to work together with people. I'm not sure if you've noticed that you spend like 2/3 of your time here working together, and then people job hunt in like complete isolation, which doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. There's this illusion that like maybe, I don't think people consciously think this, but it's like subconscious, like if we work together on job hunt, maybe they'll get the job and I won't. Exceptionally unlikely that happens. Not impossible, but exceptionally unlikely.
Can you say the forecast one more time?
Yeah, so 90 minutes of technical work practice. That's things like exorcism, code wars. I'll say more about that in a second. 90 minutes of like research and new exploration into listings, meetups, like finding new things, doing you were talking about the awards research and stuff like that yesterday. 90 minutes of actually doing the outreach piece, which is one of the most like controversial topics in the history of Turing, is like outreach or cold outreach or whatever. And 90 minutes of like cleanup of like tending to all the things I'm already have in process and have coming up. So that's like sending double check emails for people I'm going to meet with tomorrow, and like making sure everything is like done correctly and organized. And I hope you look at that and you're like, 6 hours, like I can do 6 hours. That's the point. Is it's not supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be like, this is like my consistent thing that I'm like delivering every day. And then if you so choose to like go beyond that, cool, fine, great. As long as you know that the next day you're gonna get those 6 hours, and the next day you're gonna get those 6 hours. And one of the parts that's frustrating is when people start to, like as my friend calls, like a dark place on their job hunt, is that they start lying to themselves a lot and lying to us too about what they are and aren't doing. And they're like the most extreme cases are people where it's like, oh, I've applied to like 50 companies. We're like, wow, that's insane. Which ones? And they're like, I didn't really keep a list. Like, okay, that was dumb. P.S. I'm sure the list doesn't exist. Like it couldn't have been made because you didn't apply to 50 companies. You've applied to what felt like 50 companies, and it's 11. There was one student once told me that his toddler tore up the list. And I was like, oh, why don't you send me your last 5 like cover letters? We can see if there's any like red flags popping up in there. He's like, yeah, I don't keep them. I was like, you're going into your sent mail and deleting them? I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the bullshit file. So don't be that person. I was gonna say real quick about the technical challenge. A mistake, like a way people let themselves off the hook, is by taking on what feel like good technical challenges but are actually wastes of time. Like I was talking yesterday about like, oh, I'm building a reservation system for my mom's dog grooming. Like, no, you're not. That's good if you want your job to be running your mom's reservation system. But if you want to have a real job, like you don't need to build projects like that, and like you have enough of that scale of project that another one isn't going to really do you any good. You have 2 options. You should either work on difficult things in a comfortable language, or work on easy things in an uncomfortable language. The mistake that people make with the post-grad project is an unknown thing in a new language. And it's like, oh, I want to learn about Python, I'm going to build the reservation system. Like, that's a terrible idea, because you're both trying to figure out what the fuck is Python and what the fuck is a reservation system. If you want to practice and learn Java or .NET or Python or whatever, you take a project you have already built and you rebuild it in the new tech. Easy problem now because you've built it before in the new technology, fine. Or you take existing technology and you build something new with it. I'm a big fan of small things, and like I was talking with Mod 1 on Monday about like katas and that kind of thinking that you see in like martial arts. You see musicians have scales, and like you should be doing your scales of programming. And to me, that's things like exorcism and code wars and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really matter what the problem is. I would personally do those problems like more than once. So I might, if I was saying like, say I came out of the back-end program and I want to make sure my Ruby stays sharp and like keep figuring out what the fuck JavaScript is, I would probably lay out a plan which is like, Monday, I'm gonna do a new exercise off in Ruby out in 90. And then Tuesday, I'm gonna do it twice now in 90 minutes. I'm gonna do like 45 minutes and 45 minutes, delete it, do it again in 45 minutes. And maybe I'm gonna try and press myself some different directions in there. Like, what would it be like to write super short methods? Or what if I try and pack all of this into one method? What if I try not to use if statements? What if I try to like pull out as many child objects as I can? Like a bunch of different kind of constraints and flavors that you can bring to your programming. So then by the end of Tuesday, I've done it 3 times. Now Wednesday, I'm gonna do it in JavaScript, and it's probably not gonna work in 90 minutes. And then I can come back to it on Thursday and finish it out. And then I'm gonna delete it, and I'm gonna do it again second half of Thursday and into Friday. And so by the end of Friday, I've solved the same exercise like 4 or 5 times. And that's how you practice programming rather than practicing. It looks like you're practicing solving that problem. You're not. It's because once you've solved it, you've taken the like mystery of the problem away. And now you can focus just on the programming part. When you try and do like novel projects, you focus too much on the problem and you're not practicing the programming. Pro tip along the way there is companies that you talk to, individuals that you talk to, they are accustomed to individuals putting in an exceptionally zero amount of preparation. And the more you demonstrate like a degree of engagement with the individual or the company, your likelihood of moving on to an interview is like skyrocketing. What that looks like is, I'll give you an extreme example. I had an alum who was looking for a second job, and he was like set on this company of like, I feel like it's my dream job. I got an interview with them next week. Like, what should I do? I got like a week to do whatever. And I was like, okay, well, it looks like they have this API. You can't get access to the API. It's like a paid API. You need credentials and stuff. But the documentation has examples of what all the endpoints are like. What if you built one app that was emulating the API based on the docs and like spitting out data that looks just like the actual API, and then he was trying to get a like front end job, although he's a back end developer, and it was like, then build a little React thing that consumes the data off your API. And he was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And like, he didn't build the whole API, he built like 5 or 6 endpoints and some fake data and then consumed it from a React app. And they were blown away when he shows up for the interview, right? And that was, he had 3, 4, 5 days work to like put into like really wowing this company, and you're not gonna have that, especially for your first job. That's the extreme. At the other end of the spectrum, it's not uncommon for someone in an initial conversation to ask a question like, tell me what you know about what we do. And it's horrifying how many people are like, it's like a software thing, you know? And it's like, cool, see ya. Like, we're done here, you know? If you can do anything with the service or data that the company or the individual works with, then your credibility just goes way, way up. Supposedly, there are some companies who like won't interview candidates if they don't have a match on the email address to an account in the system, if it's like a free service that you can sign up or whatever. I don't quite buy that, or it's like a very small minority. But I think anybody you go to talk to, you want to know as much as you can about the company and the software. And if you can get any data, anything you can scrape, anything you can like imagine, or if they have an actual API, like amazing. If you can get any of their data and do anything with it, like, I took this JSON from your API and I put it in a bar graph with D3. It took me like 2 minutes. And they're like, oh, shit, let's go. Like, we need graphs. Let's go. Come on. They'll get so excited because, like, I swear it's like 1/4 of people show up and don't know fucking shit about it. And then the other 3/4, it's like, oh, I know you have jobs and I know I would like one. And you can get into the like top 1, 2, 3% so easily. The other people who aren't willing to do that are senior developers, because they show up and they're like, you're fucking lucky to interview me. And it's like, this thing. So does that make sense about like how to do those things? And if you're like, oh, I got 2 days and I'm gonna meet with this person and I want to do something and I don't know what to do, like feel free to ask me, and I can always come up with ideas for other people to do stuff. All right, so you get to a conversation, you maybe get into an interview. There's like this tipping point in the communication process, the whole evaluation, where we have the like initial contact. This is your outreach email, your application to jobs@company.com, whatever. Then there's often a first screen, and this is typically like over the phone, sometimes in person. And then in here, there's culture and technical. And then there's like contract. Yeah, I'm going to call logistics, which includes like timing and start date and team assignment and all that kind of thing. So in a, let's say like typical path where you've applied for a job and you've done a little bit of outreach, maybe somebody gave you a recommendation, now you're actually moving into the system. These parts are generally owned by HR. These are generally owned by the technical folks, and then you're back to HR for this. You have to understand that the roles and priorities of an HR person versus a technical person are exceptionally different, like could not be more different. HR's job as a department is risk mitigation. Like their job is to minimize risk to the company. Their job is not to hire people, it's not to get software out the door, it's not to like drive profits, it's to make sure shit doesn't get fucked up. And like you, noob showing up at the door, I don't know, you might be a child molester, you might be some crazy person, you might be like destructive to the team. Their job is to make sure that you're not, as best they can. And so when you do this like initial conversation, email, first screen, all they're looking for is like, are you definitely crazy? Right? At this handoff, there's now risk to them. Here, you're cheap. Relative to technical teams and sales teams and so forth, HR people are cheap. So a company is very likely to phone screen a lot of folks because it's like the hours that we're paying the person to do the phone screens, it's like, yeah, fuck it, like do 50 of them, who cares? That changes dramatically when you cross this line. Because now to do this culture interview and tech interview and so forth, we're taking some of our most valuable employees off the work we need them to do, off the work that we were so desperate to get done that we're gonna hire somebody with 7 months experience, right? We're gonna take them off that work and have them sit down and do these interviews and so forth. So at this point, the cost is like way, way up. There's a risk there. If you imagine you are this developer with 4 years experience, whatever, doing the job, and every day HR is like, hey, I phone screened somebody, they seem cool, would you talk to them? The first day you'd be like, all right, fine. Fifth day you'd be like, yeah, cool, fine. And if it's 10 no's in a row, you're gonna be like, you know what, I'm busy. And then when you have your one-on-one with your boss, you're gonna be like, fucking HR keeps sending me these candidates that suck, and now I can't get my features done, and blah, blah, blah. And then tech lead is gonna be like, ooh, HR, you can't be sending us garbage. And then HR is gonna be like, ooh, we're getting in trouble. And our jobs, unlike these developers who are ready to walk away at any time, everyone else in the company wants to keep their job, right? And these people are now like, shit, I talked to a couple people, they seem cool, I sent them on, now I'm getting shit, I don't wanna lose my job. like brick wall over here. Fuck these junior people that don't know what they're doing because they're getting me in trouble. That's the reality of like the tech world right now. Is like for you to get to these stages is harder than it has been at almost any point in the past, because these folks are like scarred from people that look kind of like you on paper and might be nice people, but they just don't know what they're doing. These people get mad, these people get in trouble, then they build the wall. Does that make sense? So at this point, this is now the like pivot point. If you were drawing like a seesaw, at the point where you enter into an interview, they want to hire you. Like they have now spent money to get you there. It is expensive to go through and run these like hiring processes and all that. There is no one who's like, you know what we should do? Interview 100 people, rank them, and then pick the top 2 and hire them. No one does that. It's too expensive. They'll like interview one, are you yes or no? No? Okay. Interview the next one, yes or no? It's like a serial process, like one after another. And as soon as we find a person who we think we can deal with and they seem nice enough and da-da-da-da, let's go, I got shit to do. I need to stop doing this interview thing. So if you can get to this point, they now want to be your friend. And there's a feeling when you get to the interview of like stress, right? Like, oh my God, what if it like doesn't go well and so forth. If it doesn't go great, for you, it's a learning experience. And like it cost you time and labor. It didn't cost you like real money, unless you would have been driving Uber or something, by which I mean Lyft. And to them it is expensive. Like when you enter the door, they probably they're looking for excuses to hire you and red flags to get rid of you, right? Once you get to this part, then it's like they really want to hire you. We'll talk more about like negotiating and so forth, which I have questions about. So HR's job is risk mitigation. HR's job is to not lose their own job. When they hand you off to a technical person, they want to make sure they're not going to get shouted at by that technical person or that technical person's boss. That technical person wants to get back to work. And so they want to check and be like, yeah, you seem all right. You listen to some of my wisdom that I dump on you. All right, cool, let's go. They just want to get back to writing software. And so you need to approach those conversations differently, which means you have to know who the fuck you're talking to in the first place, which is a question that people surprisingly overlook. Like, oh, we'll set you up for a phone interview next Tuesday. And then you're like, great, I'll be ready. Just ask who it's with. And then they might, like, they'll tell you. They're not gonna be like, I can't tell you that. They might not know sometimes. And then that's where the day before you send them an email of like, hey, I'm looking forward to the thing, just to confirm 2 o'clock tomorrow at this phone number with this login. I know it's still getting scheduled, or do you know for sure who I'll be talking to? And then they're like, oh yeah, it's gonna be Sally, whatever. And then you go look her up on LinkedIn, you go look her up on GitHub, you figure out what she's into, you follow her Twitter account, whatever, so that when you're in the conversation and then they're like, oh, tell me, what are you interested in programming? You're like, oh, well, I saw like you're into like big data database stuff, and that's something I don't know a lot about, but I'm pretty interested in. And then they're like, you know who I am? I'm an actual person to you, not just some rando on the phone. I love you a lot. You should come in for an interview and have a job while you're at it. Any questions on this piece, on the like roles and priorities? Question.
So you mentioned that we should approach those 2 conversations differently.
Yep.
So how would we approach the first screen with HR?
Yeah. One of the mistakes I think people make with HR is they ask questions that aren't actually going to impact whether you take the job or not. People will be like, It's actually one of my next little bullets is idea of like trigger words and phrases. In HR conversations, I wouldn't ask anything about leave, for instance. Like, it's every tech place and every tech job has somewhere between an exceptional and a ridiculous leave policy. Like, it doesn't matter. You're not going to choose to take the job or not based on the leave policy. So just like skip it. Questions I would ask HR. I like to ask HR type people kind of meta questions about the process. Like, I saw this job listing up. Like, are you seeing a lot of applicants? Where do I fit in kind of the scale of experience that you're seeing? Are you seeing mostly other like kind of junior people like me, or are there senior people in the mix? If along here, if in this process you all found 5 people that you thought were amazing, are you going to hire 5 or are you going to hire 1? Is it like best of the best situation? When people fall out of the process or when they get rejected, what phase do most people get rejected at? Like, do most people get moved to the interview and then yes or no at the interview? Or is it like no one gets through the phone screen, and if you get through phone screen, then like you're in good shape? Those kinds of questions, because that's actual useful information to you, and it recognizes the person as doing a like complicated job, not just being like a FAQ human version, right? Where it's like, what hours do we have to be there? What do you do around holidays? It's just like, who cares? Like, you're not going to pick a job based on that, right? And it's also not like actionable. If questions of salary come up in here, this is a point where like I disagree with some other people's advice, and so I encourage you to like ask other people what they say. I'll tell you the right answer, which is like the way I like to ask people when we're hiring them is I ask about salary. I want to know 3 numbers. I want to know what's the salary that you could take this job. What's the salary that you'd like feel good about, and what's the salary that you'd be excited about? And what I find in response is it's tough. Like I guess I'm not like every boss kind of, and so I'm not interested in a like see how few dollars I can pay you to get the work. There are hypothetically like those people, but I think in tech there aren't that many. If asked questions about salary, about your previous salary, in my opinion, that's one I do have a hard line on. It's just like, tell me about your salary at your old job. The answer is like, I don't think that's relevant to being a software developer, which is true. And then I would quickly redirect it to what I'm looking for in my first job is, and then personally, I would phrase it the same way that I asked the question, which is, you get the privilege of kind of leaning on the Turing stats, right? And you could say like the median graduate is their salary 75, and so if you're looking in Denver, for instance, I would say like the average Turing student is getting paid 75. Average Turing grad is getting paid 75. I think I'm a little bit above average, and like I'd be excited about 85. Like feel good about 80, 75 works for me. And then people can be like, oh, okay. And then if they come back with like 75, then you kind of understand that like they're trying to get you for the minimum price they can, or your expectations are like high for what the company pays. Company pay is like all over the map. Some of the biggest companies pay the least. That's often my hesitation. Like when we have these like partnership conversations and stuff, like when I was talking to FedEx, and I was like kind of rooting around a bit, like what's pay look like? And they're like, well, it's competitive with the industry. I was like, what's like, tell me a number, right? And they're like, oh, like typically 70 to 80. And I was like, okay, great. Because there will be some bigger places where it's like 45, 48, 50. Generally, my recommendation guideline for grads is like I consider 60 a pretty hard floor. I think a job less than 60, like it would have miracle type situation. 65 for like a job company that you're excited about, where you feel like you're going to be learning a lot of stuff. You're really convinced on the mentoring package and whatever. 70 to 80 is like pretty normal. Like 80, I start to feel like, congratulations, that's like pretty sweet. 80 to 85 is like the highest. Generally we'll see somebody without any experience or like relevant degree. 90 and above is usually like, oh, I have this electrical engineering degree or whatever, or happens once in a while for like just kind of average typical students, but it's pretty rare. Asking for like 80, you're not going to offend anyone. No one's gonna be like, how dare you, get out of the process. 85, same thing. 90, there'll be some, you have about 1 in 5 shot of them being like, the fuck? Like, they're not gonna retract the job offer, but it's gonna not be a super amicable like negotiation. Or I think, yeah, to me, like I would, if you think you're pretty good, then I would ask for 85. And now all this changes if you're in San Francisco, where salaries are like insane. And so in SF, I would ask for 100 and expect to get paid around 90, which sounds kind of sweet. It is insanely expensive to live in San Francisco. Like getting paid 100 in San Francisco is less disposable income than 80 in Denver. Chicago and New York salaries are slightly higher, but they're not that much higher, like 5K kind of higher. And the challenge there is, even though at that point you've like crossed the tipping point where they really want to hire you, the cost to let you go and get another one like you is not that high. It's not zero, but we have other applicants we could screen and interview. You take the job, and this is why in my opinion, and now like I haven't had to negotiate a lot of salaries for myself, or if I did, like I was in a position of power where I could like command the salary that I wanted. I recommend you get into that position. It's pretty sweet. So like, I understand that like my perspective is not the same experience for everybody, but tech is not a place, like the classic thing when you look at income disparity, whether it's like race or gender, education or whatever, is people taking like a low paid job and then incremental raises over 10 years, and now they've lost like $500,000 or whatever. That's just not the story in tech. Like the second job you take, the salary is not at all related to your first job. And so if you decide, you decide to take the job for 65K and you learn a bunch of stuff, and 2 years later, they're still paying you 65, and you're like, hey, I kind of want to make more money, and they're like, sorry, that's all we got. And then you go to another place, no one else is going to be like, oh, you got paid 65 at the last place? We'll pay you 70. They're going to be like, you have 2 years experience. Sweet, here's 90, here's 95. Like, you're not you're not like cutting your long-term prospects. And so at the time where you're here for your first job, your only leverage is the money they've spent here, which is like hundreds of dollars. And so your ability when they're like 70, and for you to be like 85, and then be like 72, and you'd be like 87, like it's not gonna work, because there's more where you came from. Once you've been there 6 months, once you've been there 12 months, and then you're like, hey, when I started like this 65, like I made it work, but now I'm thinking, I know, like if this is the best we can do, like I might have to start looking for a second gig. And they're like, don't leave, please don't leave, right? And then now you have shitloads of leverage, because all the investment in you over those 6 and 12 months, all that ramp up time, the fixed cost of hiring a developer is like $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. And so when you're getting paid 70 and you now want to get paid 80 a year later, it's like, should we pay her 10,000 or should we spend 40,000? Let's go ahead and pay her the 10,000, right? Whereas at the beginning, we'll get another one of you, because it only cost us $500 or $1,000 to go through this process. Does that make sense? like getting that leverage, you can do a lot of things. Was that a question or a stretch?
No, okay.
Some other people will tell you that like if you take a first offer, you're done. Like you should always push back and ask for 5K more and so forth. Maybe that's right. My opinion is like unless you're in a situation where you have like you're supporting a bunch of people, and whether that's like parents or siblings or kids or whatever, and like that 5K is really gonna make a big difference, I personally wouldn't bother, because the jumps are gonna be a lot bigger than that down the road. And the only time that I go against that is when it's when you're like the first junior person that the team has hired. And the situation there is that they just don't know what the market rate is. And so they might come at you and be like, oh yeah, we're super excited. Here's like 65. And they're thinking you're going to be like, woohoo. And then you're like, so here's the thing. The average grad's at 75. I think I'm a little bit above average. Could we compromise on 75? And then they'll be like, oh, 75? Oh yeah, okay, sure, whatever, fine, who cares? Like, it's not, the impact, even on a small team, the difference between 75 and 65 is like $800 a month, right? And when I look at like, this process cost me more than $800, you're somebody who I already like, and we've vetted you and so forth, do I want to start over with another rando person, or just pay you the $800? Like, I can just go for it. Make sense on those pieces? Any questions on that? Also, you should know that in the bigger the company, the typically less negotiable the salary, because they have like levels and standards and so forth, and they get into problems. And even at like our size with 30 employees, some companies will have two people doing the same job getting paid very differently because of that initial negotiation. That seems very fucked up. And so then eventually companies like, this is fucked up, let's like level these things so people doing the same job get paid more or less the same. And then after that, when you're like, hey, I need this extra 2,000, they're like, hey, sorry, here's the deal, this is the level, like, it is what it is. I think it's always fair to ask how a company determines salary and value. Like, what can you tell me about how you all arrive at, like, especially if it's like not a number you feel great about, how do you all arrive at that? And it was like, oh, we look at like Glassdoor for comparable salaries. And then I like to dig one level deeper and be like, that's super interesting. It doesn't fit with the research I've done. Can you give me some of those companies and positions that you're looking at so I can like do my own research? And they'll be like, yeah, okay, yeah, we just made it up. And they're like, cool, as long as we're just making stuff up, how about 80? All right. Yeah, that's all HR. These people don't know shit about it. Don't bother asking them. They don't know, and they don't want to say, and they don't want to guess, and whatever information they tell you is probably wrong. In these oh man, we gotta finish. Last note for today is about trigger words and phrases, and there are little things that here and here you bring up as thinking that they're good, and they're actually little like body blows to your interview chances. Topics such as mentoring, pairing, work-life balance, leave, and test-driven development are all perfectly interesting topics, but they need to be handled a little bit carefully. When somebody says like, oh, tell me what's important to you about a job, and you're like, oh, I want some place where we're like really using good practices, and like I love TDD, and like they might be like, I love TDD too, come on, let's go. Or they're gonna be like, oh, FNG, as they say, fucking new guy, who's gonna come in and be like, the testing's terrible, how does anyone write this garbage? It's like, I don't wanna listen to that fucking guy. Never mind, like just don't worry about it. And the same kind of thing with like mentoring. It's excellent to like talk about mentoring and so forth. Most companies do not have a mentoring system. They don't know how to do it. And so when you talk about it, you need to talk about it in a way of like, here's a thing I want to figure out how to do, not here's a thing I expect to be delivered unto me when I show up. Right? Pairing is one, like if you like pairing or hate pairing or whatever, you want to get some sense of what they do. And I would feel comfortable expressing like a soft preference of they're like, I would ask them the question, you know, like, oh, and when I'm doing work, you know, sometimes we like to do pair programming. Like, is that a part of your normal development practice? And they'll be like, well, like Mondays and Wednesdays, like in the mornings, people like to pair. I'm like, cool, awesome. When you come at it as like, I really do my best work in pairing. How often do you all pair? And then they're like now feeling kind of guilty about it. You see what I'm saying about like, these are perfectly fine topics to discuss, but you just don't want to come off as like binary, like super in favor or super against. Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit more about those conversations and then how you actually like succeed in a job if you get one. When you get one, just kidding. See ya.
Thank you.